Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso. We just wrapped up our interview with Gary Wilson, and Gary is an author. He's written over 7 books that discuss real estate investment, talking about flipping, rentals, wholesaling, but also more importantly, he's a very accomplished investor. And today what he did is he shared us his story and some very kind of actionable segments. Anthony, what were some takeaways that you had today?
Man, I will tell you, there was so many good nuggets in there. He really shared. I mean, our take notes and try to write down my highlights for when we do this. And I was running out of space.
Yeah,
you know, so I'll share a couple. For one, we've had people on our podcast, and you've probably heard other successful people that have been on podcasts. But what is unique with Gary is that he's been doing this a longer time.
Mm-hmm.
Or like he said, he's done this through 4 kind of financial crises.
Yeah.
Or is it 3 and there's going to be another one?
4th and 5's coming up.
Yeah. So that's where you really learn. A lot of these guys who started investing in 2009 or later haven't seen what's about to happen. Mm-hmm. So it's really great to hear his point of view. And what I thought was very interesting, and you know what, I think this is a common theme. When you see somebody is successful, I mean, there's some common traits. What he did is he surrounded himself with his friends of people that had the same mindset. He had a mentor, like a couple mentors. And, you know, we're asking the next time, but I bet if he didn't have his college roommate, Socrates, or that guy, the older gentleman that he met, he probably would not have been here, right? If they didn't take him under their wing, or maybe somebody else would have. But like even during his lunches, I mean, he wasn't going out to lunch. He was going to the library, right? He wasn't out partying. He was out studying. So, and now that's paid off for him. So yeah. I thought that was super cool. What takeaways do you have, Cam?
I had 2 as I kind of look back on this interview, and again, you listen to the guy speak, and you can tell that he's been through it. He's experienced a whole bunch, and one of the first takeaways I had was, man, when you talk to really successful people, is they are an open book most of the time, and I think that this guy is just another example of, man, here's my experience, here's how I handle it. These opportunities are still available to you. Here's how you can go do it yourself. And so that was kind of the first takeaway. I mean, you look at some of the things that he's set up as far as resources on his website, and, man, you could be lost in there for days. But the other thing that I noticed is we didn't dive too deep into the business side of it, but he's started and managed several successful businesses over his lifetime. And in our hierarchy of wealth, what we talk about all the time is that if you look at someone that has created a substantial amount of wealth over one lifetime, it almost always includes business and or real estate. And Gary is a perfect example of that. And, man, great interview. I know you guys will enjoy it. And we're going to have him back. Right?
Yeah.
He's coming back for our summer series on financial freedom. He's going to be one of our main speakers, and I look forward to him kind of continuing this conversation. So I know you guys will enjoy it.
Enjoy the episode.
Take care. Gary, we are excited to have you. We've talked before a couple times, so we know a little bit about your background, and we look forward to sharing that with our listeners today. If we could just kind of take us back. Tell us a little bit about your story, how you got started, and then maybe transition into real estate for us.
Sure. Well, I guess a really important piece of my background is that my mother's family and my father's family were complete opposites when it comes to finances. My father's family was relatively wealthy, going back several generations. I mean, farmers and merchants, and you know, some of my uncles flew room airplanes, and so they were very good with their money, very smart, very savvy, and built up, you know, quite a bit of legacy wealth. Mother's side of the family, total opposite, living paycheck to paycheck. You know, smart people, teachers, accountants, things like that, but their plan was Social Security and a pension, right? And to basically die broke. That was their plan. And I saw it, my grandfather, and, you know, so I had this crazy programming growing up that I had to deprogram. And what happened is through high school, we have moved from the city to the country in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. And if you know anything about Northern Virginia, there's a lot of wealth there, a lot of old Virginia, we call it old money, old Virginia wealth. And I got to witness firsthand how they thought, what they did, how they behaved, how they acted, particularly relative to money. And you'll find out a lot of really true wealthy people, they're not flamboyant. They're not doing the bling bling. They're not driving around, SUVs with leather and all that kind of junk. I'll give you an example. One of my best friends from college, Wilson Enix, his family lived on the James River, a 5,000 acre plantation. He was a millionaire by the time he was 25. But when he bought a boat, he didn't get a big giant boat. He got a 16-foot John boat with a little Evinrude on the back, and he built his own trailer, right? So what I'm getting at is they're frugal, but they do take nice vacations and things like that. So I learned from that. And in college, here was my big break. My college roommate, freshman year, his name was Socrates. Father was a Greek immigrant. And when we met, it was a pure chance. We went in for orientation the summer before our freshman year to take pre-exams. What English level are you at? What math level are you at? Things like that. So we met, hit it off, and decided we would be roommates. And we go back to the student union where all the parents were, and lo and behold, our parents were talking to each other. So yeah, crazy. And we graduated, and through college, by the way, I was able to deprogram all the stuff I had when I was growing up. Like my mother's side of the family saying, rich people are lucky, rich people are greedy, rich people are crooked, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
My dad's side of the family was of, I have to admit, my grandparents came through the Depression, and they were multimillionaires, but they would take scraps of soap in a little mesh bag and melt it down to make a new bar of soap. When they passed away, they had millions and Coca-Cola stock and things like that. So I had this crazy program, and with Sock's family, I got to see.
Gary, sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to know. So you got two truths,
Yep.
right, about rich people. How did you decide which one to follow?
It was actually through my high school and college years observing other families. That's what it was. Okay. And some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. I'm glad to be considered part of their ranks. And one of the things I recognize is, generally speaking, they are very giving, generous folks. Wealthy people are. You just don't always hear about it. What you hear and see is on television, like Hollywood people, trying to get on the news because they did something special. I don't know, or politicians. But these are just regular folks. They just happen to be very good with their money. And I'll give you another hint. One of the wealthiest ones I know is one of my clients, and became good friends. He's a little bit older than I am. I probably have to refrain from giving his name because you probably would know who he is. But his father started a really big shoe company. There was a big hint there, and sold it back in the 80s, and it became part of the Athletic Attic. So, but this particular person franchised 650 stores worldwide, and he never buys a new car. He buys nice cars, but they're used. Secondhand. He needs everything, the furniture. He bought a brand new house. He didn't go get all brand new furniture. He went to estate sales and got really nice high-end furniture at a great discount. That's another example way past my high school and college years. And I don't want everybody to think that they're cheap, they're tight, they're not. I will tell you, everybody listen to this podcast, and you please write this down. I can teach you how to make money and build wealth. And there's a process for it. There's an actual path to follow, and I've learned it. But I'll also tell you, you've got to have a plan for defense. You got to play offense and defense. You got to put points on the board, and you got to protect your points. Because if you don't, the rest of the world is going to play offense with your money. You're going to get marketing material for new vacations and new homes and new cars and new boats and new watches. They because of the way merchant accounts operate. See, credit card companies say, we don't share information, which is true. But the merchant account behind the scenes that processes all those charges, they do sell your information. So if you ever wonder why you go out and buy a new dress on a credit card at Nordstrom's, and all of a sudden you start getting these articles and magazines and ads for Rolex watches and things like that, it's because you use your credit card to buy that dress, and the merchant account sold your information. It's not magic, it's science. And they will get you to let loose of your money at every turn they can. They don't care if you go broke or not, So again, you got to play defense. So I'm passionate about that, guys. So I apologize for getting off on
No,
tangent.
I'm digging it. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
No, you're speaking to me. I'm the guy that when you buy stuff on Amazon and at the bottom it says these three are normally bought together. I'm like, well, that looks great. I'll take all three.
Yeah. So here's what happened. Sock and I became best friends, and after college, we're like, we're gonna go rent a house. We're gonna get one right on the beach. We're gonna be like chick magnets, party maniacs, and everybody's gonna come to our house. And we called his dad. His dad said, "No, you're not." He said, "Don't be stupid." He had this Greek accent, and he would like spit would come out when he talked. And he said, "You're going to buy a house." So we said, "Okay, we're going to buy a house." And he said, "And don't do anything till I talk to you and I'll teach you." We said, "Okay." We couldn't wait. So we went out there looking for houses for sale, found this 2-bedroom townhome, 1 block from the ocean. And of course, girls living there at the time. We're thinking, man, we're going to buy the house. We get the girls,
Yeah.
We
Girls
called
come
his
with
dad.
it.
Called his dad. We said, "You're going to be so proud of us, Mr. DeMett. We just put a house under contract." And he said, "Really?" He said, "Tell me about it." We said, "It's a 2-bedroom townhome, 1 block from the ocean. What's the price?" So we gave him the price, and he said, he was screaming, and we could see the spit coming out of the phone. He called us idiots. Everything. He said, "You're idiots." He said, "Get out of that contract before midnight, because if you do it before midnight, you can rescind a contract." And then he came down and showed us what to do. And we bought a 4-bedroom ranch with 2 bathrooms, January 1986. I just graduated in December. So literally less than a month of graduating, Sock and I bought a house together. We lived in 2 rooms ourselves, each got a room bedroom, and rented out the other 2 rooms. The other 2 guys paid all but $50 of our monthly outlay. So it was 1986. So remember, interest rates were still high, and you could still assume mortgages. And you can still assume VA mortgages today. So we assume the guy that owned it was in the Navy, and we assumed his VA mortgage, first mortgage. He had a second he took out to take out equity. So we refinanced that. And Mr. DeMett did co-sign that loan. It was the one thing he had to do for us. And the remainder of the equity, we gave the owner a note for the remaining equity as a third mortgage. All 3 mortgages combined. Yeah.
Pretty creative.
Gary, would you mind explaining what assuming a loan is to Cameron so he understands?
Correct. So today there was what's called adjustable rate mortgages. There always have been. Mm-hmm. Most of those are still assumable, just like VA. Now, what that means is the gentleman, and I wish I could remember his name, who owned the house, instead of us getting a brand new mortgage and then the proceeds go to pay off that seller's mortgage, we were allowed to fill out some documents that had us take over his mortgage. So Socrates and I took over the serviceman's first mortgage, which was a VA mortgage. We took over the payment responsibilities, and our names went on the mortgage. And then he was removed from the mortgage and relieved of liability for the mortgage. So the assumption means you just simply take it over. And guess what? They didn't have to check our credit. They didn't have to do anything, due diligence. It was just a legal part of the process that, hey, we're going to take over these payments. Nowadays, there is a process in place. They will check you out before they let you assume a mortgage. Back then, it was. Yeah.
How did you guys know how to do that? What was Socrates' dad's background? Did he suggest this creative financing?
Yeah. So so here's an interesting story. Sock's mom was already living in the States in Chicago, and when she graduated high school, her parents sent her back to the homeland, Greece, to meet all the family and all that, and she stayed there for the summer. Well, when she came back to America, she came back with, we called him Mr. DeMett. He shortened his name to DeMett. Came with Mr. DeMett in tow, married to Mr. DeMett. Well, he didn't speak any English. So he ended up putting himself through MIT. Okay, this guy was smart. And the way he made money was he would wait tables. And he jokingly said he remembers to the day, people would ask him, "Can you bring the salt and pepper?" And he would say, "No, we have no salt and pepper." He didn't know what salt and pepper was, And I can tell you some other funny stories. But in any case, he put himself through MIT. He got a job as an engineer in Fort Lee, Virginia, which is in Hopewell, Virginia. And he started studying how to invest. The old granddad of investing was a guy named Carlton Sheets back in the 70s and 80s, okay? And 90s too, for that matter. And so he learned from him and some other guys that have long since passed. And he started applying those principles. which is, assuming mortgages, doing wraparound mortgages and things like that. And it was necessary at the time because traditional bank financing, granted, it was loosening up through the 80s, thanks to Reagan's economic plan, and interest rates were lowering, but they were still very steep. It was expensive to get them to, like, payment interest rates were over 10%. In the beginning of the 80s, interest rates were 18 to 21%. So in any case, so he learned from learning and studying and basically practicing the art and science of buying rental properties. And he had a portfolio of about 150 units in and around Richmond, Virginia. Well, he's the one who taught us that first technique, which is basically assume a mortgage. And I've saved my first 4 paychecks to come up with my portion of the down payment, which wasn't much. It was like $1,000, and then we had another couple thousand in closing costs and stuff. Oh, I'm sorry, I did have an E-bond. So my grandmother was still alive, and my dad said, "Well, call your grandmom. They got something for you." And my first thought was, well, I could have used that 4 years ago when I first started college.
Yeah, thanks, Dad. A little late.
Yep. But in hindsight, I'm glad she waited, because I think that was like $1,600 or something, or maybe $1,000. So that, with my first 4 paychecks, that was how I was able to do my portion of the down payment and closing costs, and the mortgages took care of the rest.
Yeah. What I enjoyed, I jumped in there because I thought it was a good lesson there for a lot of people, a lot of parents, is that it sounded like Sock's dad was in a position just come in and buy this place outright if he wanted to.
Yeah.
But instead, what he did is he was teaching you guys how to take this thing on yourself.
He did. He never gave us a dime. He did co-sign for that second mortgage, but that was it. And never gave us a fish. He taught us how to fish.
Nice.
And I tell you, to this day, guys, if I can identify one singular pivoting point in my life as far as economics goes, my business life and investing and all that, that was it. That was the critical moment. And I still today, I think about that every single day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What's interesting is there's people that we can't assume the loans anymore, but when somebody buys a house and then rents out the other room, like now it's called a house hack.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it's something new, but you were doing it in the 80s.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. House hacking was interesting. It's a new term that basically describes an old process. And we weren't the first to do it. My stepfather's father, my step-grandfather, he did it. And he came from Sweden. And when he came over, the Sears used to have the old Sears Craftsman house, $2,500 for an entire house. That's what he built. And he rented out the additional rooms. There was a local college that had a medical school, and he rented the rooms out to the senior, graduate medical students who were, only thing they did was sleep there anyways, and they were never there because they were always working. And he got like $100 a month from each of them. And I remember thinking about that. And then, so nowadays, a lot of, millennials, actually, I know people in their 50s that are doing it now to rapidly grow an investment portfolio. They'll buy a place, claim it as their personal home, live in there, right? Live in there for 2 years, a requirement, sometimes it's a year, rent out the other rooms. And after the required time period is up, they'll refinance it with another conventional mortgage, then take those proceeds and go do the next one. And I know one couple personally, they're friends of mine. After 5 years, they've now got 7 homes with, I think, 29 different bedrooms they rent out. They rent rooms individually, and they have an RV, and they travel all over the country, U.S. and Canada both, actually. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So let's dive back in here. So Sock's dad kind of showed you guys how to take this thing over.
Yeah. Yeah, so we lived there for 2 years. Sock lived there longer. What happened is I ended up falling in love with one of the pretty blonde beach girls, and got married 2 years later. So Socrates bought me out. So the way it worked structurally was the party of Socrates, the solo party of Socrates, bought out the combined party of Socrates and Gary. Right, the way that the deeds were written and all that, and I got like $8,000 out of it. So I put in 3. Lived for about $50 a month for 2 years, and got 8 out. And I thought, this is awesome.
Yeah.
So I went and bought my next house with my soon-to-be bride. And then we had our first daughter. And then 3 years later, we moved to Pittsburgh, sold that house, bought another one in Pittsburgh. It was a few years after that. I'm sitting there 35 years old, thinking back and reflecting on what Mr. DeMett had taught us. And what happened was I was getting promoted. I was rising up the ranks. I was, a junior manager and a senior manager, and then like a corporate vice president. I was really moving up. And the more I moved up, the more I hated it. And I remember back when we closed on that first house in Virginia Beach, we drove down to the Outer Banks, which was about 2 hours away from Virginia Beach in North Carolina. Went to one of Mr. DeMett's houses down there, and we're on the deck, and he's pounding his chest. And he's saying, if you boys do what I tell you to do, he's looking at us and pointing just like this. I promise you by the time you're 35 years old, you won't have to work for anybody else. And I'm in Pittsburgh, waking up 35 years old, supposedly doing great because I'm getting promoted, and we, then got a bigger house, right? In a nicer neighborhood, all that kind of stuff. Had 2 kids, and I had 5 weeks vacation, 401k, medical, dental, all the perks of a rising executive.
Yeah.
But I was completely, totally unhappy. I was like I was a skeleton with the cobwebs. So in any case, I'm thinking, what if I'd have done what he taught me? So he had since passed away. So now I was out on my own. Socrates moved to Florida. I started buying lots, building lots. By the way, 1 block from the ocean, $11,000. Socrates was buying those back in the 80s, So and now they're worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So
Sure.
so I didn't have that golden touch. My touch was always sledgehammer and chisel and granite. That was my touch, I started investing when I was 35, and I paid for this guy. His name's Gerhard Flugfelder. He's since passed away. I found him at an apartment association meeting, and he liked me. He took me under his wings. He said, "Well, what are your goals?" And I said, "I want to retire when I'm 40. I don't like the corporate world." He said, "Why are you waiting so long?" I said, "I figure 5 years is a reasonable plan." He said, "You want to really learn how to do it and do it in a year?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You give me $1,000 a month and I'll do it." I was nervous. I'm thinking, I don't know this guy. I just met him. But I did it. Mr. Flugfelder, at 72 years old, was still hauling refrigerators up and down stairs and stoves.
No
Remember
way.
Wealthy people being frugal and give her the money.
Mm-hmm.
So he owned hundreds of units, mostly paid off. So in any case, in that first year in Pittsburgh, I bought 10 properties, a total of 30 units. Some were duplexes, some were fourplexes. And at the end of the year, my net in-pocket cash flow was as much as my net my money coming, my salary coming in from the bank. Okay. And I thought, my gosh, he did it. And he said, no, he said, my gosh, you did it. He said, you're a good student. And he said, I never did that before. I just liked you and, figured I could help you out. And now what I did was, because I'm Mr. Conservative, and I really did pay attention to people who were wealthier than I was, the next year I actually took off, and I paid off any secondary debt I had. I used lines of credit, personal lines of credit, home equity lines of credit. So, I had some cash, I used that. And at the end of the year, I decided to take another year and pay it all down. So I was only left with first mortgages. So now 2 years out, if you can imagine, I've actually got some substantial equity and substantial cash flow. And that's when I realized I can leave the bank. But what I thought was, I want to be in a position where I have enough capital to do 4 projects at the same time, and enough cash flow to pay me plus all the other perks I had, insurance, all that stuff. And sort of going out and started buying again. And and this is a really important lesson for everyone here. I got what's called a blanket mortgage. It blanketed my existing 10 properties. Okay. Mm-hmm. And he was a commercial lender. He was also a private lender. And what I found out was, most traditional banks will not give you that kind of a mortgage. They'll say, no, they want you to refinance everything and start from scratch with a brand new first mortgage. But I knew enough about banking, because I was in banking, because of amortization. I'd already paid down some of my mortgages, and I didn't want to start over again. So I kept pushing. I got to find somebody who will let me do this. And finally I found this gentleman, he also through the apartment association. So I didn't have to pay hard money rates. It wasn't the bank rates, but it was only 2 points higher. Instead of 8% at the time, I was paying 10%. But I got a blanket mortgage that allowed me to extract all the equity across my portfolio in the form of a line of credit. I went out and bought the next property for cash. and then I fixed it up or raised the rents, got its own first mortgage on it, and only about 50% loan to value because that's all I needed. I only wanted to borrow what I needed to pay myself back. So I did that. So I pulled money out of the new house in the form of its own first mortgage, okay, 50% loan to value. It was enough to pay back the line of credit. Now, here's the interesting part. What do you think the lender did for me on that line of credit when I just added another income producing asset to my portfolio?
Increased it.
He raised it up. And that was one of the next big lessons I learned as I studied. I used to go when I was still working the corporate world, guys. I never went out to lunch. I went up to the library, the corporate library, with a brown bag lunch and studied Morningstar and Barron's and Forbes and Fortune, and actually studied prospectuses for different companies and different mutual funds. I literally studied money. And I learned some valuable lessons. And when I studied REITs, by the way, I found out that's what the REITs were doing, real estate investment trust. It's basically a big mutual fund, but instead of stocks and bonds, it's properties. And they would go in, and often with cash, and buy a property. Sometimes they'd even pay full price, which really struck me as odd. Why are they paying full price? The answer is they actually didn't really care so much because their game was to add just enough value to raise rents to get the property to a new tier, and then they would either sell it or refi and pull out their equity, go onto the property. That's what the REITs were doing. And I thought, well, that's it. I wanted to know what are the big boys doing, and that's what they were doing. There were some more lessons I learned in that, by the way. The REITs, they focused on the bigger buildings, and here's why. When you evaluate a big rental property, anything 5 units and above, okay, the REITs are generally buying multi-thousand unit projects, but regardless, the way a income producing property is valued, it's not so much what the next building down the road sold for. It's really more about how that building produces. What's the net operating income? So if you think about valuations of anything, businesses or properties, as you increase your income, let's say your percentage, your interest rate, whatever, it goes directly to the bottom line because most of your expenses are fixed. So in other words, a 100-unit building where everybody's paying $1,000 a month, okay? And currently the net operating income is say 10%. Their 100-unit building, $1,000 a month is $100,000 a month. So at the end of the year, it's 1.2 million. So if their profit, net operating income is 10%, that's $120,000. Okay. Now let's say the owner raises the rent by $100, only 10%. That's a reasonable rent increase. I mean, I've done it before. The conventional mindset is, well, then you just raise the value of the building by 10%, but that's not true because all the expenses are relatively fixed. Insurance, taxes, maintenance, repairs, all that. That additional income goes right on top. It goes to the net operating income. So if you were making 10% before, i.e. $100 a unit, now you're making 200 unit cash flow. The value of the building did what? Doubled. Yep. And that was the third big secret I learned is buy decent properties in decent areas. And everybody listening, I'm going to tell you right now, I know from experience, do not buy the cheap, crappy stuff. I'm telling you, you'll pay a dreadful price for it. I did that in early years. I made money, yes. And if you're on a podcast, you can't see my hair, but God has a sense of humor. He gave me gray hair on the left half, right? And the other half, or the right half, maybe right half, I don't know. On the screen, I'm backwards, but half my hair is gray, the other half's not. But it's not like intermingled, like it's cool looking, like in temples. No. It's so it's those half that the tenants, all those bad tenant stories.
It's that side. Yeah.
I'm here to tell you, buy better properties. I promise you, I know they're more expensive, but they will last longer. They'll appreciate more. You get better tenants, you get better rents, you get all across the board. It's a much better way to invest. And I know that some of you are buying the cheap, crappy stuff because I did too, because it's easier. There's more of them. Mm-hmm. It's less expensive. The cap rate's higher. But just remember, cap rate doesn't just reflect income. It doesn't reflect just reward. It reflects risk. So The higher the cap rate, generally speaking, the more risk. Tenant risk, crime risk, all kinds of damage risk. There's very few markets that have high cap rates that don't have some associated risk. Very, very few. So in any case, I learned to buy the better properties. And lo and behold, they did go up in value faster. And I was able to have bigger rent increases because the existing rents were already higher to begin with. I got better tenants that had better jobs and they stayed longer. It was just all around. It was a big pill to swallow, I'm telling you, but it definitely long-term, well worth it, So, yeah.
Gary, one thing I want to go back to at the beginning of your story when you were 35, and in a year, you hit financial freedom, right? And we define that like Robert Kiyosaki. Passive income is more than your monthly expenses.
Yeah.
But could you explain a little bit, like, how did you buy all those properties? I know you kind of mentioned some lines of credit. So how do you do it? And are those strategies still available today?
All right, listeners, we are going to end this episode right here, but Gary has a ton of more information to share, so make sure you come back for the second episode.